They say grieving is a highly individual process for each person, and determining when normal grief becomes complicated grief can be difficult. There is currently no consensus among mental health experts about how much time must pass before complicated grief can be diagnosed. Complicated grief may be considered when the intensity of grief has not decreased in the months after your loved one's death. Some mental health professionals diagnose complicated grief when grieving continues to be intense, persistent, and debilitating beyond 12 months. Although it is important to get professional treatment for complicated grief, there are also some strategies that can help individuals cope better. Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of a five-part series on supporting the BME community overcome bereavement as a result of coronavirus. This has been organized by Rainbow Charity, sponsored by the National Lottery Community Fund and the Department for Digital Culture and Media and Sports. We thank them all for this great opportunity. I am AC Mbeng and I am the host. Today, you are all welcome. And today we will be discussing complicated grief and seeking help beyond grief. On our show today, we have three amazing individuals, all from around the world. We have Eposi Ziton, we have Dzenga, and we have Christiana Koko, and myself, AC Mbeng, as I've said before, as your host. So each and every one of you watching, you're welcome today, and we really appreciate you creating the time to watch our show and also to contribute to this show. So as I said, this is the fourth episode of a five-part series on coping with bereavement as a result of coronavirus. In the course of our discussion, if you are struggling with what you must have heard here, or maybe some memories about the loss of a loved one have come back. In your memories, they've come back, they've hit you, and they're hitting you a little bit hard. We have a support phone number here which you can call. You can visit the Rainbow Care Charity website as well for more information. And that phone number, somebody will be at the other end of the phone to give you advice and also to signpost you. So I'll get our guest speakers to introduce themselves and we start the show officially. You are all welcome, and I will start with Eposi Ziton. Welcome once more, sis.
Well, thank you so much for having me again. It's an honor. I'm Eposi Ziton. I'm the host of Spending Quality Time. I have 3 kids. I'm married, and I'm so happy to be here again because, like she said, grieving is a normal human occurrence. So we have to empower our community and give them the tools to be able to survive with this. So I'm so elated as an inspirational speaker and an influencer to be on this show today. I'm also an entrepreneur of Eposi Ziton Incorporation. I'm the CEO of that company. Thanks once more for having me.
Thank you so much. I'll come over to you now, Joe, for your introduction. Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Joe Dzenga. I'm coming as a funding consultant and a representative of an organization called the Dream Blazers. We facilitate, the funding, accessing funding for community groups, and to date, in this accounting year, we have raised nearly 500,000 for different groups and organizations and startups. Thank you so much for having me on this program for the first time and to share with you the insights of the grieving process from the perspective of the community and from the perspective of the funder. Hope we'll have fun and we'll be able to go through the process in an interesting and educative way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Georgiana. You're welcome back to our show.
Hi, thank you again very much for having me to the show. I'm excited to be here. My name is Georgiana Koko. I'm a nurse practitioner here in California, and I'm a Cameroonian. I'm a wife and a mother of many children. And as somebody who has actually experienced complicated grief, I'm humbled and also excited to share my experience that may help someone out there who is going through that or who has not gone through that and who might, so that they should be well armed as they face the grieving process, especially the complicated grieving. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it is said no one knows for sure what causes one person to experience complicated grief while another does not. Let's hear it from our guest speakers today. You are welcome once more. We are live on Facebook and at the same time, we are live on our YouTube channel. So we are starting the show with our first general question, and this one I would like to ask each and every one of you, what exactly is complicated grief? Eposi, I would like to start with you.
Well, complicated grief, like we know, grieving is a state of sorrow as a result of a loss. And we all know that when it comes to grieving, it can be for different reasons. Maybe loss of a job, just change of your normal. But with that being said, we are really stressing on coronavirus because that's the one thing that has really brought all of us to our knees. So we know that a lot of people have lost without even expecting that. So when we talk about complicated grief, is that process of going through pain, sorrow, and just agony that you don't even know how to handle it. You fall on the side where you can't even perform your normal daily activities. So it goes for months, it goes for just, some people even go through it for a lifetime. And with that being said, we try to come to a platform like this to empower people to know how to handle the issues that come along with having to grieve for such a prolonged period. So that's what I understand by complicated grief.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Joe.
Yes, the grief or the grieving process, it's a very much subjective, individualistic concept. You can not be in someone to understand how they feel, but however they represent uh, uh, things, we can see representative things of how they feel. So when it comes to complicated grief, it's an extension of feeling that will encompass things like stress, detachment from socializing, someone in an extreme mode of even alcoholism, and a deep sense of shock to the point of numbness, to the point of negligence, neglecting your day to day activity, things like bathing, things like looking after oneself. So, this is a representation of a feeling, an extension of a feeling. Now, grieving, it's it's complicated matter in the sense that you can't prepare. There is no textbook formula to facilitate or to allow people who are grieving to follow through. This is a very much individual process. But however, when we create platform like this, we are creating therapeutic exits to manage, to help individuals or communities cope. Some of the things we can help is talking, like this conversation that we have, having someone to talk to, because sometimes when it comes to complicated grief, some people they totally withdraw, do not want to talk to anyone. They shut themselves up. They don't want to come out of their houses. So creating therapy exits like a talk show like this one or conversations like this one creates an opportunity to understand the concept of grief, how better we can manage it, and how better we can facilitate our communities to cope. One of the complicated uh, situations that we have right now is the COVID virus. It's caught many communities unaware, and it's taking lives. Unfortunately, the statistics now, they're saying the BAME communities or BME communities, they're the highest in terms of the death rates. Now, this makes it so complicated because when we talk about the BM communities, there are certain grieving rites or grieving cultural conduits or explanations or processes that are expected to be followed.
Okay,
However, we see how this can
that's
be
fine. Let me cut to a little bit short. I think you're going into the main question. So that was just to have a general overview of what complicated grief is. Then before we go in depth on what on our main topic today, which is complicated grief and going beyond grief. So I think I will go over
yes.
to Coco for her brief definition of what she thinks complicated grief is. Then I'll come back to you now for you to discuss our next question, if that's okay. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Over to you, Coco.
Yeah, complicated grief to me is a grief, like you said earlier, a grief
Mhm.
goes more than a year. I know everybody grieves differently. The journey is different. We all know the different stages of grieving from the denial up to the path of acceptance. Some people get stuck into one area of it and they stay there for more than a year. And what does that do? It makes you to have all the side effects that comes in with that prolonged period of sadness. So in short and sweet version of it, complicated grief is any grief that goes beyond a year. So when somebody dies within 3 to 4 months, the person should start feeling better. But if that person continues, the pain is still intense up to a, a up to a year or more, that type of person should realize that they're going through complicated grief. It's not normal anymore. Is it normal to grieve? Absolutely. But when it start going more than that duration, it is defined as complicated grief.
Thank you so much for that explanation. Yes, it is normal to grieve, but when it goes beyond a certain period of time, it becomes complicated, even though we cannot actually give a timeline or a frame period of when somebody has to grieve. But sometimes, depending on what is happening or depending on what the person goes through, and maybe their entire being, everything has changed. That's when you start thinking something may be wrong. And I do think as well that complicated grief is another form of ungrieved grief. So now we are going to go to our main question. What are the signs of complicated grief? Over to you, Joe.
Yes, I'll just extend a bit from the earlier notes and anecdotes. Signs of complicated grief include excessive drinking of alcohol, um, not looking after one's self,
Mhm.
withdrawal symptoms, stress, anxiety, um, detachment from community or society, or neglecting some of the routine day to day. Some people, they refuse even to go to work, they refuse to come out of their houses, they
Mhm.
refuse to eat. Those are some of the signs and symptoms of complicated grief.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I'll come over to it. Does anyone have anything to add to what Joe has just said about some of the signs of complicated grief? Georgiana, do you have anything to add to that? If not,
Um,
then
yeah, I would just say that the signs of complicated grief, it is we could just like building from our conversation of last week, you realize that the sign of complicated grief still goes to physical, mental, and social. So when you look at that at that level, at those stages, we realize at every stage we all feel the signs of complicated grief.
Okay, thank you so much. Eposi, do you have anything to add?
Well, I'm just gonna say that when we talk about, the signs, it's anything that is out of the ordinary. For
Okay.
those that know people, they know they're ordinary. They know what they normally do prior
Mm-hmm.
to grieving. So when
Mm-hmm.
you fall on the side of not doing your normal, then we know that something is wrong. And then when it extends for a prolonged period, then we start
Mm-hmm.
talking about grieving in a complicated way.
Okay. Thank you so much for that explanation. So now I'll come over to you, Coco. What are the risk factors that are thought to make complicated grief more likely?
There are so many risk factors or red flags that you will see for somebody that would suffer from complicated grief. First, if the person who died was a breadwinner, you don't have any source of income anymore, and
Mm-hmm.
their whole life depended on this person. If that person dies, trust me, it will take a long time for you to recover. I take example from mothers who knows like their main breadwinner children. They don't have that income coming. So even after a year or whatever period that we will think they should be feeling better, they will not, because they are still feeling that pain from that loved one. The
Mm-hmm.
other risk factor is, who did you lose? Like I said earlier, did you lose a child? If it is a child, the death of a child is something that parents will never take it easy until they go to their grave. If you
Yeah.
lose a spouse, studies have even showed that people who lose their spouses, I have lost in the past, and I went through grieving period of 16 years, and I managed. So I know what that is. And also, people who have history of depression, it is easy for something to just trigger, like the loss of a loved one, and then
Mm-hmm.
they end up having depression, anxiety, and also post-traumatic stress disease. Then the death that is sudden, no death is good, but if it is sudden, and I'm saying this for sure because when I lost my spouse, it was a motor accident. Nothing prepares you for such a strategy. And it is the same thing that is happening now with the coronavirus. I
Mm-hmm.
lost a friend, nothing prepared me. So, will that be a risk factor for me to grieve more than the norm? Absolutely. So, those are some of the risk factors that I could pick out to be to say could put somebody at risk of grieving beyond the normal grieving phase.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Eposi, do you have anything to add to what
Well,
Coco has
I'm not
said?
going to add nothing to that because she said it so well. And the part that I have to talk about is kind of mixed. It's almost the same thing. So
Okay.
I'm just going to
Mm.
wait till I have to talk about what I have to talk about later.
All right, that's fine. Joe, do you have anything to add to that? What are some of the risk factors that will make a complicated grief more likely? Anything to add? Then, if not, we
Yeah,
move on to our next question.
I've just a few things to add to some of the risk factors which make complicated grief more complicated. Some
Yeah.
of the risk factors include um, l- long illness. Um, Someone just said, "Oh, you can't be prepared for death." Yes, but long illness, and on the other side, there is sudden death or death by accident.
Mm-hmm.
These are circumstances that you never get to prepared for, and in some ways, um, you lose someone that you've been talking to in the last 24 hours, or you were the last person to talk to that
Mm-hmm.
person,
Mm-hmm.
and the sense of disbelief. So these are the kind of situations that a lot of communities are going through in terms of lack of preparedness, like in a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing is to seek help at maybe earliest possible. But one of the things that also makes grieving complicated is that in the case of coronavirus, when a person, let's say, have been hospitalized, you could not talk to the person, make any physical contact. Maybe you cannot even video call. So for someone leaving the house, talking and speaking and saying goodbyes, and they go in the hospital and they don't come back, those
Yeah.
are the risk factors that causes grief to be so aggravated and to be so in depth. So there is a lot, children and different sets of people, they feel different sets of the grieving process in terms of the shock and preparedness, and obviously some they can be prone to mental health and suicide, in short.
Wow, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for that explanation. And before we continue to our next question, we just let's just take a few seconds of silence to remember all those whom all our loved ones we've lost either because of coronavirus or any other issue. And we are also thinking of Eposi's your grandma last 2 weeks, and we are also thinking of Eposi Coco's husband a couple of years ago, and all our loved ones we've lost. So we just stay quiet for a moment. Thank you. And may the souls of the faithful departed through the mercy of God rest in peace. Amen. So we continue. Over to you, Eposi. Are you okay, Georgiana?
Oh yeah, I'm fine.
Thank you. We have him in our thoughts and we love you. Yeah. So we're going to move over to you, Eposi. What are the likely causes of complicated grief?
Okay. Well, once more, I want to thank you for sympathizing with me or sympathizing with my loss. Thank you so much. Well, some of the causes of complicated grief, like we said, people grieve differently, people handle it differently. And when
Yeah.
people start going through that pain and sorrow for such a prolonged period, then they are going through complicated grief. Some of the people that are more prevalent to go into complicated grief is, for example, the person that died. Like Coco already said, if you lost somebody that was very important to your livelihood, maybe your mom, your dad, and maybe you are a minor, definitely you're going to go through a prolonged period of grieving. Also, for those who are just pessimists, you have people who are negative people. They are just pessimistic about everything. When they when they lose somebody, it's almost like they're holding on to that aspect of being pessimist, and they grieve longer than is expected. We also have those that are as a result of losing more than one person in a short period of time. And that's very common now in the corona period. You have families that have lost 5, 6 people in one household. The tendency is that they're going to grieve for a longer period because they've lost so many people in such a limited period of time. We also have those that is as a result of guilt of being a survivor. For example, I'm going to go back still to Corona because that's what we're really facing now in the world. So you have people that as a result of maybe 3, 4 people have died in the home, they are the only ones that survived through this particular pandemic. They start feeling that feeling of guilt. Like, wow, how did I make it through? Why am I supposed to be the one to survive? Instead of looking at themselves as a survivor, that guilt start just making them feel uncomfortable and just grieving for such a prolonged period. We also have those that is as a result of them always depending on others. So they lack that tendency of being independent. So when they lose somebody that was like their support system, they start just grieving forever. And that is very common with those who are in abusive situations. When they lose that person who was their support system, it puts them in that state of thinking they shouldn't live anymore. They should just go away and just die and just don't have to live because they feel like they cannot support themselves without that person that was their support system. There's also a situation where people don't have a great support system. So you don't have friends, you don't have company, people that can be on your side to talk to you, to guide you, to emotionally take you out of that space. People like that also grieve for such a prolonged period because they just lose that support system that they thought they had, and they don't have more people around them to guide them. So they just keep being in that state of grief, anger, and confusion. And there's also the situation where you have people that have suffered from PTSD or have been through other traumatic circumstances. When they lose somebody, it takes them back to that whole feeling of anxiety, and they just grieve for such a prolonged period because already they have been going through anxiousness and anxiety. And now they've lost somebody that they care for. It puts them back in that state of trauma. So people like that will grieve for such a prolonged period, and nobody will really understand why they have to deal with it for such a long time. So in a nutshell, I'm going to say that you have certain people who are more, they are more put in that circumstance where they can grieve longer than the normal grieving period that people expect people to grieve. And like we always say that when people are going through complicated grieving, we have to be there to support them, to guide them, to pick up the signs, to know that they are grieving. So for the most part, I think that's what I'm going to say on that topic when it comes to people that are more prevalent to going through complicated grieving.
Okay. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that explanation there. Yeah, normally there's an expectation that people have to grieve within a certain period of time. So individuals grieve, people grieve differently. The length of grief as well also differs from one person to another. And as we've heard from our guest speakers, it has there are risk factors that may make someone grieve longer than another person. There are also causes of why or reasons why a person may grieve longer than expected. So if you know someone, or if you have known someone that you think has grieved for a long period of time, or maybe longer than you were expecting, do not judge them. It would be a good idea to speak to them and to find out if they need further help, because whatever they will be doing, like Joe said, they'll go into bottles, into alcohol, or into drugs and things like that. They may not even know that what they are doing is wrong, because all they want to do is to numb that pain, to numb the feeling, because they don't really want to go through it. But instead, it is detrimental. So I know sometimes people get judged for they've grieved for too long, but sometimes that grieving for too long is a cry for help. And thank you so much once more, everyone, for all your contributions. I would also like to ask, is there anyone who would like to add to what Eposi has just explained?
Yes, just a few more comments and possibly additions. I will talk about the idea of grieving, or the grieving process. Is someone who lost their mom very recent, and lost a sister, a blood sister, to COVID. You see,
Yeah.
the process of not being prepared and the sudden shock never prepares you for it, but it straight away launches you into a grieving journey, or into a grieving process.
Yeah.
One thing that I felt helps, or one thing that could be necessary, is that allowing the grieving itself to take place. You see, so the idea of participating, witnessing the burial, being there, it's a mechanism that facilitates closure, or allows the grieving process to reduce the gradient of the grieving process. So some of the factors, like some of the speakers, they say, like death by suicide, accidental death of a parent. Some people, they're just isolated, And one of the best, solutions is that sometimes we talk about situations when when there's a death. But the best way is to remain connected, like with your loved ones. Check on them. Some people, they grieve because they had an opportunity. It causes extension of grief. They have an opportunity to see that person, to visit, to chat to them on the phone. So they go into the endless cycles of grief. Why? Because they are now grieving that I had a chance. and I didn't use it at that particular time. So it's important that we educate, even as people, that as communities, as friends and family, to remain connected in life, so that we learn, we reduce the grieving process.
Thank you so much for that. That's really well explained. And thank you so much everyone for watching. And if you've been affected in one way or the other, we've got a phone number here to call, or you can visit Rainbow Charities website, and there's also an email to write to. You will be signposted to the right place for further help. And we want to use this opportunity to thank the National Lottery Community Fund and the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sports for sponsoring this program. It's a huge opportunity for us to be able to have this conversation and to help individuals who are grieving during this coronavirus, especially people of the Black and ethnic minority groups, which sometimes we do not talk a lot about issues like this. So having avenues or having platforms like this give us the opportunity to have the conversation. Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry. Okay. 1 second, guys. Sorry. Sorry, I had a guest who needed something. So we are going to continue with more with our other question, which goes to everyone. How can someone with complicated grief disorder get help? I would like to start with Coco with this one.
Um, I think the first thing is identifying that you have that disorder and then tapping into your resources. The first resources that we have right now is like what we are doing on this platform. You have numbers, you have, if you are in the Birmingham community, you know that you have the radio charity care center that they will be reaching, you can reach out to them for help. But if you are not in that community, look out in your community. The first should be like, do you go to church? Right? If you go to church, you have your church family. They will be your greatest support system, your pastors, your elders. Then your friends are also there for you. I know you already said about talking. Our culture, we don't like to talk, but this is the time to talk and talk and talk your head out. Because the more you talk, the more you come out from the grieving process faster. But if you stay bundled up, you're going to get isolated, and guess what? Everything is just going to continue that way. So my advice would be look at wherever you live, whatever resources are there. Don't be ashamed. Don't don't feel as if I'll be seen like being a weak person if I go and ask for help. You know, I struggled with grieving for 16 years. I came to this country. I went to nursing school. That's when my nursing instructor told me, do you know you are suffering from complicated grief? And I said, why would you say that? He said, oh, I can see you every minute you see cry. You have the picture of your loved one all over the place. You have to move past that. But I did not even know that that was so. My request would be just seek for help in your community, your church, and your friends.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, true. Sometimes you can be grievy. You can grieve for too long without even realizing that that's what you are doing. And at times you need people like your lecturer to point it out. And as you said, giving a voice to that which hurts you makes a huge difference in whatever thing is going on in your life. So it's necessary to give that a voice and talk about it. So over to you, Joe. How can someone with complicated grief disorder get help?
Right.
Additional?
From the African perspective, I talk about some of the things from where I come from Zimbabwe, for example. Right at the funeral, there is a nominated person, not a nominated person, but what they call a funeral friend. You know, this is the person who entertains people at the funeral by imitating what the deceased has been doing, wearing their clothes and doing things. So this facilitates the healing process. It helps people to cope with the grief that is just before them. Now, this is not be possible now in this time of COVID because of the restrictions. People are supposed to have virtual funerals. So we're saying that from where I come from now as a funding consultant, these stories, they need to be heard. These stories, they need to, a platform like this was facilitated through funding. So there is funding available for our communities to be able to launch various therapeutic exits to help cope with grief in its various form, even to practice or to do it your own way. If you want to sing, if you want to dance, if you want to have a music show, if you want to have a fashion show, as a way of grieving or as a way of helping the grieving process. So first of all, there are resources that are available that organizations or individuals can get to help them with the grieving process. Secondly, there is always an untold story of how do we grieve in our context as Africans. And now, in this particular instance, we are here in maybe in these countries. How can we facilitate our own grieving process, to help our communities to heal? And also, this funding is not only for groups or organizations, it's for individuals. You're targeting young children to help them cope with grief, buying them toys, games, engaging, making them to stay engaged so that they are not at risk of the issues around, and dealt with grief. For example, like mental health and things like that. So we can have toys for young children. We can also have various platforms. If I mentioned this one, we can also have games even for older people to able to cope, because there is no specialist in some of these events. As much as they are natural, as much as they come washed, no one is prepared, no one wishes for them. But at the end of the day, we have to come up with mechanisms. So what we have, it's an opportunity to tell our story, to have access to resources. We can have a whole company, for example, which helps people to grieve, just in a snapshot.
Over to you, Eposi.
Well, what I'm going to say is that I'm going to use a real life experience to talk about that, because I'm one of those that have always talked about counseling and therapy. That has always been my thing, because that's one of the things that I liked when I was grieving as a result of the separation of my parents. Had it been that I had the tools that I needed, I would have healed before I could start noticing that I'm still going through a lot of grieving as a result of that. So I'm going to tell you all a story. When I was in high school, one of my classmates died, and he died with his sister. They had a car accident and both of them just died. When we went to that funeral, that mom who lost those two kids, she went into total shock. And I mean, when you looked at her, you're just going to start crying. You didn't even have to know her to look at her and cry. Immediately, what I know today, I would have been able to know that this woman is going to grieve for a long, long time. Because we've already said that one of the reasons why people go into complicated grieving is loss, that the type of loss. This is a mother that lost two kids at the same time. But like our brother just talked about the Cameroon, the African communities, that a lot of times we don't even, offer self enough. Because right there in that funeral, you had people who were like, oh, well, things like this have happened before. We feel sorry for her, but we know stories of people who have lost even 3, 4 kids. That is not the approach that we should be taking when something like that happens. And I tell you what, over the years, when I saw that woman, she was not herself from the person that I knew before those deaths. She looked like almost a mad woman. And a lot of people just kept saying, well, she's not the first person to lose somebody. She needs to get over it and live her life. It's easy to say that. But as a community, when we start noticing that people are grieving longer than it's expected, and we know the reason for their grief, we need to offer self, take them to places where they can get support. And that's why we talk about workshops. Africans, I don't know if we do a lot of creating of workshops and support groups. We cannot always rely on the government. We need to come up and form workshops within our local communities, like those who are in groups, maybe a school group or a traditional group. Within those groups, we should form support systems where when people are going through such a complicated period in their lives, we should come in and say, this is what we want you to do. Maybe every weekend, let's do painting, let's do drawing, just taking them from that space of grief and doing something different. That escape, just taking them to do something which is like an escape. It helps them to grieve healthily and come out of their grieving. And for a mother like that who lost 2 kids, if other kids in the community can offer self and say, Mom, we are here for you, we can come in and help a little bit. We're not going to totally take your sorrow away, but we can make up for it by offering ourselves to you, coming in to help you cook, offer food, clean, other things that will make this mother sit back and say, you know what, I lost my kids, but there are other kids in the community that are making me to know that every child can be a child of yours, even if you didn't birth them. So I'm also going to talk about myself, because all of what we're doing is to help during this corona period. And we know of the displacement of families because kids have lost their parents in some cases. And it's almost like for me, who went through separation of my parents as a result of a divorce, I was grieving. So just put yourself in the place of a child who has lost their parents as a result of the coronavirus. Their grief is going to be for an extended period because it's difficult to replace the place of a parent. So it don't matter that maybe a family member takes them over to keep them. They're always going to need something that they're going to say, I wish my mom or my dad was around to give me that. So we as a community, what we need to do is to form all these therapeutic groups, like Koko talked about, introducing people like that into the church family, where they can be mentored, they can be given support so they don't feel like they are alone. And then my brother talked about buying gifts and toys and offer to kids that might be going through that. Because, for example, if a lot of people had offered self to me when I was going through the depression or stress as a result of my parents' divorce, maybe things would have been different for me. But if I think about it, I don't even think that people even realized that I was going through anything. The only time that somebody brought that to my knowledge was when I went to do my vitals in order to get into nursing school. When I did my vitals, the doctor said, I need to have a talk with you. And I said, okay. And he said, yeah, you're just 26. How come you have blood pressure? You're almost at the borderline. What's that? And I said, I'm okay. He said, no, you need to talk to me. Talk to me, what's going on? You're too young to be at the borderline. And I said, well, before I left Africa, my parents were going through a divorce, that I was so caught up in the whole drama. And he said to me, before they had you, they knew each other, right? And I said, yeah. He said, so think about it. You need to live your life. Those are their stories. You may have been part of their story, but you have your own story to create. So as a result of that, put that in the past and live your life. That was so therapeutic, because when I left that doctor's office, I came home, I spoke to my husband. I said, the doctor told me, you need to live your life. I did not have money to go to therapy or counseling, but he was already my therapist. Being my doctor, he played a vital role to guide me, mentor me, and make me realize that I don't have to be in that place of loss. So as a society, let's not always think that you have to go to an actual therapist or an actual counselor. If you don't have the money, look for help from people around you. Talk to people who may have experienced what you're experiencing. And for those who might identify that you're going through that, they should jump in. That's why we talk about propping. And not every time will you prop and you have the answers, because people are ashamed. We come from a culture where, I don't want to be judged. I don't want people to look at me a certain way. So you have to keep propping and say, no, I know something is wrong. You don't look okay. Talk to me. And even if they close the door, come back again and ask them more questions. I know maybe you were offended, but I still know that I need to help you. Please talk to me. If they cannot respond, get a group. Come as a group and sit with them and say, we're not judging you. There's no reason for judgment. We just want you to be yourself and be honest, because we want to help you. We want to support you. All of that those are tools that we are using to help this person get out of their grieving. So please, as a community, when we form platforms like this, I know there are people who are going to say, oh, every day they are talking about grieving, because we want somebody to use this information. We want people to hear it over and over again so they can start saying, okay, I need to really put this into practice. I think there's something that they're really emphasizing that they want people to hear. So please, for those who are watching, take this seriously, share it, tell somebody about us, and please, let's give a lot of recognition and appreciation to the owner of this platform, because this is a wonderful platform when it comes to our community. Thanks again, Clarice.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. There's a voice in each and every one of us. I know, like you said, many will say every day it's about grief. Every day it's about grief. Yes, because every day there's life lost somewhere, somehow. And every day there's a family, there's an individual, there's someone out there who has been affected by the loss of a loved one. So topics like this, issues like this, we cannot just say they do not happen. We cannot be nonchalant to topics like this one. We have to talk about them, because I think Sister Coco said earlier that talking alone is therapeutic, and it's really necessary to give a voice to all these issues, because when you bottle up, that may also be another reason for your grief to become complicated. So thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions. I think this has been very educative and really powerful. Coco, do you have anything to add? There's a question from the audience as well.
Um, all I have to say is, again, as Eposi said, mentoring. Let us be mentor for one another. Let's be one another's keeper. And like having those support groups where you have to identify the support group. Is it for those who have lost their spouses? Then you go to that group. I work in a cancer center, and we believe a lot in support groups. So you have group disease specifics at times, disease by ages. So let us use every resources that we have to make sure that our loved one or any one of us, we don't go through that prolonged grieving, because that could really be detrimental to our health. We cannot even go more deep into what the effects are, but we all know it will take us a long way if we can just be there for one another. Don't be judgmental. Somebody grieved for 16 years. Don't say, oh, why did she do that? I did not know any better. All I knew was to cry. So thank you again for having such a wonderful platform and these discussions. And we'll keep learning. Life is a learning process. To me, I believe you stop learning when you die. So you can learn from a little child, you can learn from an adult, and let's just be open minded as we go through life.
Thank you so much. Yes, we learn every day, and we thank especially the Rainbow Care Charity for giving us the opportunity to have this voice, to pass on our experiences and our knowledge, to be able to help others out there. And it's more especially our sponsors, the National Lottery, Community Fund, and the other one. So we are so grateful. It may be coincidental, or I don't know. I think it just happened maybe a few hours ago. One of our famous blogger, she's a Cameroonian, and she's called Henrietta Thatcher. She she just passed on to blessed memory. I don't know if it's this afternoon or this morning. I've just seen messages going around. So and today we are talking about grief, about complicated grief. It's a heartbreaking news for every Cameroonian that knows her, because this is a woman. She doesn't do blogging for fun. She doesn't only do blogging, but she helps individuals. When I say help, she helps physically. She practically goes there and she sorts problems. She solves problems between people. Unfortunately, she has been ill for a while now, and we've unfortunately lost her. So we send our prayers to her entire family, and may her soul rest in peace. Guys, this is a reason why it's necessary to watch this show. Do not say Henrietta is not your sister, it's not your mother, or it's not. She is a friend. I don't know her personally, but I know she's touched the lives of so many. And the loss of a life like this one will affect each and every one of us in different ways, and we will grieve whether we like it or not. People are actually already grieving now because just the message is going on there. It's really heartbreaking. So may her soul rest in perfect peace. And we continue. There's a question from the audience. I've put it on the screen. Are there any positives that can be derived from grief? I've so Valentine says he just thought about building resilience. Are there any other?
Yes, I think grieving helps us to look back into our being of existence, right? Um, Grieving is not only negative, it helps you, for me, it helps me to go back to my root. Where did I come from? Why am I having this? Right? And it turned me towards God, to know that God is the author and finisher of my faith, and that nothing, you cannot rely on anybody, on anything, because usually we take our life and we put it on human beings. We rely on our parents, we rely on our friends, we rely on our spouses. And when that is taken away from us, what happens? We get so destroyed. But if you take that faith and put it in whatever you believe, to me is God. That way, whatever comes, the way you will grieve will be different. So to me, one of the positives of grieving is, it makes you to go back in your inner self, and it brings the best out of you once you get through it. And as I always say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's my
I
own.
really thank you. I really like that. Yes, what doesn't kill you will only make you stronger. And I also know that there is one thing that I believe so much in. Grief focuses you. Grief changes you permanently. If you were on the right path of your grieving process, grief will change you in so many positive ways. Grief humbles us. If you haven't grieved before, you or if you've experienced that intense grief before, you will know that grief really, it humbles you. It makes you to retrospect, to look into yourself, or to do some soul searching or self-examination. And Eposi, what have you?
Well, I'm going to say that when I was growing up as a little girl, I never heard about celebration of life. I always heard about just people being feeling miserable. But
Yeah.
today, to show that our communities have grown, I hear a lot about celebration of life because, like Coco said, grieving helps us to connect with our spiritual being, to understand that there's a purpose for our living or for our existence. So now we're talking about celebration of life, which is a positive because we kind of thank God for even knowing that person. We kind of thank God for even letting that person be a part of our lives and understanding that whoever you're losing, somebody has lost somebody that was even much closer. So it makes us appreciate life and the gift of living even more. So this whole idea of the benefits of grieving, yeah, it's okay to grieve because you're kind of connecting your stories to the person that you've lost. So even while we're grieving, we're also thanking God for having the opportunity to have memories with that person. So I think there's a lot of light underneath the tunnel when it comes to the idea of grieving.
Yes, that's brilliant. That's really good. And I think with grief comes the ability to find meaning, to find purpose in that grief. We all know how sad, how emotional it is when we've lost a loved one, but sometimes your healing may come when you start finding meaning or the purpose of what you are going through. And that's basically finding meaning after your grief or going beyond your grief period. Which is why sometimes you see someone who has lost a loved one, they start looking better than they were before. It's because they have grieved probably positively, and they've decided to find purpose. They've decided to look for meaning beyond their grief, look for meaning and purpose beyond the loss of their loved one, despite the sadness, despite the emotions that come with our loved one. And I just want to encourage everyone to be able to do that if you've lost someone so dear to your life. We all know that grief goes with love, and how much you grieve will also determine how much you loved that individual. In as much as we want to hold their memories on forever, some people will say move on, but it's better to say we move forward with our grief, with the memories of our loved one, and then finding meaning in that grief. Joe, I'd like to come to you. What do you think are some of the benefits of grief?
The benefits of grief are the multitude of opportunities that comes with grief. Where there is a problem, that's where opportunities are hidden. Now we're talking about, the various ways of coping mechanisms. What about getting funding to come together, establish an African village, whereby we do our thing? We take Africa, the continent, we bring it to where you are in America, in the UK. It's an African village whereby we cook Cameroonian food, we do everything Cameroonian. It's a way of therapeutic measures and activities. Cameroon, I would like to learn about Cameroonian dance. I'm grieving as well, even if I'm from Zimbabwe or I'm from Zambia or other part of Africa. But
Mhm.
to just know other the cultural practices for how other communities cope with grief. At the same time, enjoy the food and the music. And guess what? We can access funding to establish such community spaces, which becomes accessible not only to the grieving populace, but also to the indigenous communities, because there's some indigenous maybe communities who have never been to Africa. They think that Africa is one big country, but we can have somewhere to bring them, and we charge them a fee, nominal fee, to do that. So wherever there is a problem, there are opportunities. The idea is, what are you doing with your problem? Because every problem, that's where the value comes from. Problem value equals monetary value. We struggle to say, where is the next business opportunity coming from? But if we want, we've got counselors, we can have counselors that will be situated at the village. We've got therapists, we have got therapists that can be situated at the village. Everyone, we've got artists, drummers, musicians, we can call out musicians to come and provide entertainment at different, at the venue at different times as and when requested. So these facilities are there, but what is needed, let's just put it down there. The problem is we see ourselves as customers. No, we are not the customer. Even the government of where we live right now, they want to know what black minority people are going through. How do they want to do their things? Sometimes we don't get resources because we don't spell it out. We don't approach them with a written plan to tell about our problems and how we can cope with them. Thank you.
Sorry, guys, I was still on mute. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for all your input. We've been live, it's almost 1 hour, and we are gradually going toward the end of our show. I just want to acknowledge those who have been watching and they've been contributing. So we have Valentine, who has been coordinating the whole event. We have Paul watching, Patient, Ivy, Bell Sonke. We have Sean Nichols. All your contributions, we appreciate them. There's a final question which I would like to ask each and every one of you, which actually came up when Eposi was talking. It's who are those who are likely to experience complicated grief. Is there a particular group of people that can? Let's make it brief so we stay within our 1 hour period. I would like to start with you, Eposi.
Okay, we already talked about that, but I'm going
Yeah.
to hold on to those people who have gone through loss in a very limited period of time. You know, you
Okay.
have people that, especially during Corona, that's why I chose that, because you have families that have lost 4, 5, even 6 people within a family. People
Okay.
like that are definitely going to go through a complicated grieving period, because not only in the sense that they're going to be thinking of one person, think about the fact that you lost 5 people at the same time. Of course, you have memories with all 5 people.
Mhm.
So while you're trying to have closure with one loss, you're going into now thinking about your attachment to the next person. And then you're asking questions like, why my family? Like, what's going on? Has God forgotten about us? So by so doing, of course, you're going to go through a period of complicated grieving.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we round up with one final word from each and every one of you, then we end our show. Thank you, everyone. Joe?
Oh yes, a grieving, it's a universal code, speaks universal language, but it's also an opportunity to occupy space as BM communities so that we create facilities to aid our well-being. We can access funding to facilitate our grieving processes in various ways. So sticking together and working together is the solution. Some of the solution, if it's traditional, we can provide traditional answers to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Coco, your last word for the day.
My last word for today: grief is real, and we should not be ashamed to grieve if we have to, and also seek for help when we can. We should not be ashamed. It's not a stigma, and we should be open to also help and accept those who are grieving and understand that um, it is real. So that's all I have to say. Let the community come together and help one another when they are grieving. And just to add one more thing, as they are saying, who are those who are more prone to grieving? I think studies have shown that women are more prone to grieving than men. But that also is debatable, because a man is not crying doesn't mean that he's not grieving. So that's my take home message for today.
Thank you so much. That's very powerful because you are not crying does not mean you are not grieving. Yes, we have those who grieve in silence, and that's very, very dangerous. Over to you, Eposi, for your final word for today.
Well, I'm going to say that most great things come from a place of pain. So our brother already told us that, we have to come up with different ideas to help our community. And I think that's what we're doing. So as a result of grieving, people come out with different ideas of coping. People come out with different ways of appreciating life. And with that, we just know that great things always come from a place of pain, loss, and acceptance.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that great things come from a place of pain. And that brings us to the end of our show. One of the things I would like to say before we go is when you find yourself in a situation when you are grieving, make sure you are aware of why you are grieving, aware of what you are going through, accept your circumstance, accept the emotions, and know, as our guest speakers have said today, it is normal to grieve. It is necessary to grieve because when you do not grieve, it becomes complicated. And that's what we've discussed on our show today. So we will be seeing you again next Saturday for the fifth edition of the 5-part series of coping with bereavement as a result of coronavirus, organized by the Rainbow Care Charity, sponsored by the National Lottery Community Fund, and hosted by myself, AC Mbeng. It's a great opportunity and it's a pleasure having you all again today and all the knowledge that you've shared out there. I hope one person today has been healed from this conversation. If you haven't, there's a phone number. There's a phone number which you can call to be signposted to charities, to organizations, to individuals for further help. Yes, we all know that grief can get complicated, and that's what we've discussed today. So, you have a good weekend. Stay blessed as always, and we love you all. And I also appreciate all our audience today for your contributions and your time. Take care,
Thank
everyone,
you.
and bye for now.
Right. Thank you.